So I bought another stainless frame and slide from Caspian, similar to the ones I used, or identical to the ones I used on my first build. And I also ordered the frame with the rails oversized, so these are milled slightly larger than they need to be for the slide to fit onto them. So you need to take some material off of these. You can also buy them fit so that the slide slides right on, but apparently you've got a little greater potential for a perfect fit if you size them yourself. Professionals apparently will use a milling machine to get those fit, then they'll do the hand lapping. I don't have a milling machine at this point, so I'm going to do it by hand. The first one I did was an enormous amount of effort and didn't turn out very good. So I'm going to try a different technique. I think it'll be easier and I think I'll get better end results. And I'll explain that in just a moment. Here are some measurements I took before I start removing metal. You can see the width across the rails is slightly less in front, slightly more in the rear. I don't know if that's so that you can get the slide to go onto those rails on the front of the frame first, and then using hand lapping work it onto the rear. I don't know, but you can see I've got a little bit of material to take off. The distance you can see here is 75/30, and this is 75, 55, and 65 is the width here. So a little bit needs to come off here. And so I just wanted to kind of get an idea where things stood before I started taking metal off. You can see the height of the slot here is 102 thousandths. The height of the rail is 103 thousandths. So I'll take a little bit off the top of here. I'll use the same technique that I'm going to use to narrow that rail down. So what I'm going to do is I've got a coffee table here, and my assumption is that the glass is very flat. So I'm going to be running these rails over sandpaper, all placed on the coffee table. This piece of paper is just to prevent the coffee table from getting scratched up, which I already did before, but just to keep it from getting worse. I've got the paper on there, and the idea will be to take a certain number of strokes on this fresh edge of sandpaper, maybe 20 strokes, I'll count, and then I'll flip the sandpaper around and use another fresh edge and do the same number of strokes on this side. I just want to take off equal amounts of metal on both sides. And then I'll flip the frame up on its top at some point and run that over sandpaper as well to take a little bit of this height off, since the thickness of these rails is slightly thicker than the grooves inside the slide there. So that's the gist of it. That's what I'm going to try. And then once it starts to go on, I'll use lapping compound to finish it up. And I've read other folks mix a little oil in with the lapping compound just to help it slide a little bit easier as you do the lapping. So I'll try that this time around. I'll use the same lapping compound I used for the first one. It's from Brownell's 600 grit and 800 grit. So that's the plan. I guess I can just go ahead and begin, and you'll, if you didn't understand exactly what I'm going to do, it should become clear in a moment here. I've got the sandpaper overlapping the piece of paper here. This is 150 grit. I'll just start with this, and then I'll begin to go down to finer grits so I can sneak up on the final size. And the frame actually, it butts into the sandpaper, so it should be relatively easy to keep just this portion of the frame on the sandpaper and the rest of the frame on the paper. So let's give this a shot here. So that's 20 strokes, and looks like a cleanly machined surface. So let's flip this around, and that was 20 strokes. Let's do 20 strokes on this side. Actually a little difficult to keep just this on the sandpaper, but that's pretty good, I think. And every so often I'll see if this goes on. Actually what I may do, because that height is going to prevent it from going on, let me take a little height off of there. Not too much, but a little. Not too much. And I'll just keep at this, taking a tiny bit off at a time until the slide begins to go on, and I'll start using lapping compound. So I've gone to 220 grit sandpaper, and I did discover that it's a little tough to keep this lined up on the sandpaper without sanding this part of the frame. So let me line this up the way I want it. That looks pretty good. And then I'll just move the slide right next to it, hold this down, and just use this as a straight edge. And that makes it easier not to do any sanding on this part of the frame. It's not critical. It'd be more of just a blemish than anything, but better for it to look good. It's starting to work its way on, so I'll just keep working at it. So with only maybe 15 minutes effort and quite easy work, I've already got this going on quite a bit there, and I think with some oil it would actually go further. And goes on the back even a little bit, and that was the tighter. This was wider in the rear than in the front, so even it goes on there. I've been trying to apply a little more pressure on the rear of the frame as I'm running it back and forth, since it was wider in the rear, to take a little more off there. It goes on there, and you can see, I mean, right now I cannot jiggle it at all, and yet it slid on relatively easily. So I'm very, very happy with how quickly and easily I was able to take some material off these rails, and it was quite easy to control it as well. Easy to take off just a tiny bit at a time. So, and I've just been using 220, mostly 220, and taking some off the top here as well. I think I'm close enough that I'm going to try to mix the lapping compound and some oil and see if I can't get this to go on further, and we'll see how that goes. So I tried to use the lapping compound and oil and still couldn't get the slide on too far, and it was tough to get back off. So I did a little more sanding. I'm down to 400 grit now, and this will go on not much more than before, but it's still tough to get back off. But now it'll go further on the rear. So let's see here. This will actually go on quite a ways, but you can see it's still snug. So I think I'm going to call it quits with the sanding and just use the lapping compound, because it's right there, it's very tight, and takes some pressure, quite a bit of force to get it to start moving back off. And so I think I'm on the way to having a really nice fit. So I'm gonna call it quits for sandpaper and just use lapping compound and oil and start to use just my hands to run this back and forth and to get the final fit. But it's been relatively easy and relatively quick, and I'll wrap it up with some lapping compound and see how it goes. Alright, so I'm all done. I actually had to take a little more sandpaper to the rails because it was still a pretty tight fit, and I did that, and then with a little bit of effort put the slide on the frame and used some lapping compound and oil, worked it back and forth, and it's nice and smooth now. It's not a perfect fit. Let's see, actually, you can see, get an idea here. How snug it is. And it jiggles just a little bit. But not too much. Nice and smooth. So it's not perfect, but it's better than my first attempt by quite a bit, and it was easier than my first attempt. So if you don't have any resources like a mill, you can do it just using a nice flat surface like a glass coffee table and a little bit of elbow grease and get pretty good results. I should have been maybe a little more patient at the end, but the results are pretty good. And as I said, it was easier than my first attempt, and the results are better. So I'm headed in the right direction, and if I can do a little bit better with each build, then I'll be happy with that. So I'm headed in the right direction, and hopefully this is helpful to someone out there. And if you don't have a mill, you can give this a try, and I think you'll be able to get pretty good results.